Nobody, and I mean nobody in Hollywood as a film studio spends money like the Walt Disney Company to produce its film and television projects. And unfortunately, in recent years, very few of them have ever returned enough money back to Disney to cover the costs of these massive productions. And wouldn't you know it, our friend Caroline Reid over at Forbes magazine is back at it again, pulling a slew of Disney production tax returns from the United Kingdom. The 4 flops of 2023 that cost Disney $1 billion. And guess what, folks? Those costs, they're still rising. Here we go. Renegade Online. Well, folks, welcome back. Another great day here at Valiant Renegade. It's good to see everybody out there once again. And if you are like one of the many folks watching this video, not yet subscribed to this channel, please take a moment and turn that little red subscribe button to gray. Hit that like button, hit that notification bell, share this sucker out on the social medias, and of course, please do leave a comment before you head out the door today. Let's dive in from Caroline Reid and Forbes magazine. The 4 flops of 2023 that cost the Walt Disney Company $1 billion. Disney financial reports in the UK revealed that it spent $965 million on 4 of its most high-profile streaming and film flops this year. Disney has been on a cost-cutting drive since Bob Iger, Disney CEO, returned to the helm of the company in November of last year. 3 months later, he told investors that the studio needs to reduce costs on everything that we make because while we're extremely proud of what's on the screen, it's gotten to the point where it is extraordinarily expensive. Now, key reminder that most things out there we don't get this kind of information on, especially if they're produced here in the U.S. Those returns are usually kept private, even when getting big tax credits from places like California or New York or Georgia or even Louisiana. But in the U.K., those filings by law have to be made public. And you can see here, Caroline brings it up in the Forbes article, budgets of movies and streaming shows are usually confidential as studios combine the cost of them and their overall expenses and don't itemize how much they spend on each one. But as we have reported previously and extensively, productions made in the UK are an exception. Studios have to set up separate companies to make each one and get a cash reimbursement of up to 25% of the money that they spend in the UK. Each company has to file financial statements and they shine a spotlight on the spending. The first on the list is Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, or Ant-Man 3, and Caroline had an article in Forbes some months ago about this. The movie opened to lukewarm reviews, but no expense was spared as Disney spent a total of $193.2 million on pre-production and filming. Ant-Man grossed $476 million worldwide, which was lower than both of its prequels. Studios keep around half the proceeds, with the remainder retained by theaters, giving Quantumania an $81.9 million profit after it banked a $37 million reimbursement. Now, that reimbursement is the film tax credit that the UK affords back. However, it may well end up in the red when its next financial statements are filed, as they will show the colossal cost of post-production. Now let's pause right there because I want to make it very, very clear. That $193 million that Caroline Reid is citing is what was reported up through the end of calendar year 2022, or at least as of their last reporting date for Ant-Man and the Wasp. And as she goes on to stipulate with this and many of the other films on this list, really all of them, most of the post-production expenses would not have been calculated into these figures. It would be on a future follow-up return or financial statement from each of these production companies. Most post-production, things like editing, and don't forget VFX, how about CGI? What most Disney movies these days, especially from their major studios, things like Marvel and Star Wars, are rife with massive amounts of CGI that cost tens of millions of dollars on top of the other massively expensive post-production costs. So this is why Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania at day's end is more likely to look like a $250 million final price tag than just the $193 that has been so far reported. And of course, none of these estimates or actual figures at this point would include massive marketing budgets. We know that the Walt Disney Company spends on average more than any other studio on major marketing campaigns, at least up until just the recent few months. some of those budgets we've seen drop back and come in a little bit lower than we anticipated. Things like Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, for example. We've talked about that before. But one thing to note is that all of these things, whether it's Little Mermaid or Ant-Man and the Wasp or Indiana Jones, these all come in with, at minimum, $100 million marketing budgets that go on top of the final production costs. Those also have to be calculated and accounted for when we talk about what kind of return on investment each of these productions actually brings the Walt Disney Company. And with a big video that we did before that was featured on Fox News, for example, and many, many other places like the Daily Wire, Breitbart, so on and so forth, well, we could see that over the past 12 months, up to the point of where Indiana Jones was released, it looked like the Walt Disney Company had lost somewhere to the tune of about $1 billion, and that was before Indiana Jones released. Now, you've heard us talk about before Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. It flew under the banner of Pym Productions 3 Limited in the UK. That was the name of the company that was formed, of course, referring to Hank Pym and the Pym particles. Well, they always come up with clever names. And the Little Mermaid, guess what? It's no different. Sandcastle Pictures Limited. That was the Disney UK subsidiary behind the Little Mermaid. They had spent a total of $265 million. Repeat that. They had spent $265 million on that film. Staffing was one of the biggest single costs, with the production team peaking at 252 people and cumulative pay coming to more than $26.9 million. Financial statements reveal that The Little Mermaid's cost was forecasted to be over the production budget due to the potential COVID-19 impact. The company received a $4.1 million furlough grant from the UK government to help it through the pandemic, as well as a cash reimbursement. Again, that's the UK film tax credit, a cash reimbursement of $53.4 million. This put the Walt Disney Company's net spending on the movie after the film tax credit at $212 million, giving it a $70 million profit on its $282.1 million share of the box office. That's the rentals that would have come back to Disney. But it doesn't stop there. Just like Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, its costs are set to swell in its next financial statement due out later in the year or early next year, as the movie was only a month and a half into post-production at the date of the latest filings. That means that net spend by Disney of $212 million is going to get significantly bigger. You can probably add another $40 to maybe $50 million, if not potentially more. Think of all of the massive amounts of VFX and CGI that went into making the final product that was The Little Mermaid. We're talking about a big ticket item here, folks, and that $70 million assumed profit on what had been reported, that's going to evaporate very quickly. And again, of course, that would not include another $100 to $150 million that Disney would have spent marketing the film into theaters. That movie is a big loss for the Walt Disney Company. Yes, folks, you can have a $500 million box office and still be a flop. And of course, next up, the hits keep on rolling with Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. We covered this story when Caroline Reid broke it several months ago. In November of 2022, we at Forbes revealed in the UK's Express newspaper that Disney had spent $294.7 million on Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. That only covered pre-production, filming, and 1 month of post-production, so the spending doesn't stop there. It got a $55 million tax credit or reimbursement, bringing its net cost down to $238 million, meaning it would need to gross $477.8 million for Disney to break even. So far, the movie has only made $357.9 million, and its costs are set to surge. In its next set of financial statements, Disney may end up making a loss on what seemed to be a surefire hit. Now, just like Ant-Man, just like Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, and just like what is going on, we believe, with the Marvels, all of these movies, not only did they have very expensive post-production price tags with VFX and CGI, but unfortunately, many of these films, Indiana Jones included, saw itself have significant amounts of reshoots after the movie had completed principal photography previously. We had heard from people like John Williams that referenced a new ending that was shot late last year or early this year ahead of this movie's release. None of those costs are factored into that net of $238 million that Caroline Reid had in there. This movie is going to swell back up with a net cost easily of $300 million plus, which is exactly what we've been telling you. And again, that doesn't include the estimated, by Deadline magazine, if I'm not mistaken, $100 million marketing spend. So all in, that movie cost around $400 million. It would need to make around $800 million at the box office globally just to break even. Interestingly enough, we don't often talk about the actual cost of production for the Disney Plus shows. Big headline stuff like right here with Secret Invasion, for example. This is another very expensive production. This show was absolutely destroyed by Marvel fans with one of the worst Rotten Tomatoes scores for anything Disney has put out with Marvel. 7%. Bad CGI. It looked terrible, but yet, folks, it still cost a lot of money to make. Unlike theatrical releases, subscribers don't pay for a show on Disney Plus. Instead, they're charged a single fee. And there's no way for us to really know how much money a show generates on Disney Plus because, frankly, no individual show actually does generate an individual pile of revenue. Sure, there's a perceived value based on the number of views compared to how many other things that a certain subscriber may have watched on Disney Plus during that same billing cycle for 30 days, for example. But there's no real cash flow for a show, short of what we had previously on Disney with things like Premier Access, where they charged you $30 to watch Black Widow, for example, when it dropped day and date with theatrical releases. But as Forbes had talked about before, this show, Secret Invasion, bafflingly had a budget of $211.6 million, despite the shortcomings of its visuals. As we stated early on, this $1 billion cost right here is still climbing. It is probably going to rise another couple of $100 million before everything is all said and done. And of course, it does not include any of the marketing expenses for these theatrical releases and whatever Disney may have spent on things like Secret Invasion to market it onto Disney+. You can see how expensive these things get, even with Disney Plus shows. $212 million for Secret Invasion at the end of the day. Look at what we just reported on Blue Stockings Limited, which is the production entity in the UK for the new Star Wars show coming in 2024, The Acolyte. That Star Wars production from Lucasfilm came in with roughly a $50 million spend on pre-production alone. That's building the sets. That's leasing Shinfield Studios for 6 to 8 months. That's building inside of the soundstage and out in backlots. That's creating costumes, props, everything else that goes into this, and that's before a single camera rolls. And this is why every company out there, Disney, Warner Brothers, Universal, you name it, they are all looking at controlling these costs going forward because they've gotten out of hand. The problem, of course, is that Disney is guilty of this more so than anybody else by an order of magnitude. When you look at what Disney puts out in the theater every single year, nearly every picture that comes out from a Walt Disney Studio subsidiary is basically a tentpole piece. Things that hit with 150, 200, and $250 million budgets now, which has become far too commonplace. Most other studios like Sony or Universal or Warner Brothers might have 1, 2, 3 pictures that reach that level of mega blockbuster tentpole. But Disney, it's everything. It's 7, 8 movies a year, and it's killing them. Stay tuned. We're going to talk about this more in the Sunday show at 6 p.m. Eastern live right here on Valiant Renegade. Make sure you stay tuned for that one, and we'll have another video Sunday catching you up on the box office. Sound of Freedom is surprising again. We'll talk about that soon. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button, leave a comment below, hit that notification bell, and until next time, take care.